Welcome to the TuMeke podcast. I'm Matt Jeffs. We have a special guest today, David Brody, who is a CPE, a certified professional ergonomist. He's the ergonomist lead for food solutions at Cargill, and he did a great webinar with our own Jenny Zhao recently. So we asked him to come back and kind of dig down a little deeper. And David, I just want to thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Matt. Appreciate the time here.
Oh, it's always good. And you know what I enjoy about whenever I see David Brody on social media or anything is you have a sense for the big picture. And if you don't mind me saying, 27, 28 years in ergonomics, and you've seen a lot of field in evolution in the field, and me too. So we're right there together. I wanted to start out with what you see that might be different today compared to when you started.
Geez, when you started, I mean, that's it. Let's just ask a question like, Dave, how old are you type of thing is really what you're asking here is like, because I mean, I'll be honest. I mean, like you go back to when I started, we were using the Snook tables in paper form with a ruler to go out and figure out how do things line up to evaluate push-pull recommendations. You know, you're hand calculating the NIOSH lifting equation. You're doing all that. You know, our toolkit was a camera, not as good as your phone at this point, a tape measure, and force gauges that were pretty rough looking back then. So the reality is everything has changed. I mean, like, and probably what's really important though is, and I think what we've seen is that the last 5 years have been rapid change. Like there's been a kind of consistency in ergonomics for a long time. We've had good tools. We've had a process. But it was almost stagnant for a period of time of like, how do you change what you do? And there was no new tools for a while until the fatigue models came out, the failure fatigue models. So there was almost like there's no new assessments, no new things. So we were doing the same process for a while. I mean, certain things were very well validated, so it was fine. But we needed, you know, what's the next step? And some of the work that was being done at Auburn University was bringing us some new information. And then you get technology starting to kick in to try and say, how can we start collecting data, measuring things in different ways that's less time consuming, maybe more accurate, a combination of both, obviously, but things that allowed you to start seeing things in different ways. And also the big evolution is starting to use technology that allows us to start looking at cumulative exposure, longer periods of time, versus our single snapshots we've been doing for years, type of thing, and what we've been used to. So obviously, I mean, it's technology in reality has added a layer of renewment, right? Of how we actually look at ergonomics and how we treat the field, type of thing. And for those of us, you know, when you've been doing it a long time, it gets you out of your rut. It's kind of like, oh, I've been doing this for a while. And all of a sudden, new opportunities kick in and you start to see what that could mean. And that just re-energizes your whole process again.
It's an exciting time. I'm glad you said that. You know, I think we all started with what was called disparagingly in the field pencil whipping. And there was a checklist, and it's better than nothing, let's face it. And then we started to get these interesting tools to use. But as you said, they wound up being snapshots. And didn't you also see, or didn't you get a sense that I felt there was a gulf between those of us who are the specialists in this and people, you know, out on the operations floor where it's like you didn't speak the same language. Did you kind of notice that kind of back in the day?
All the time. I mean, it wasn't even that far back in the day type of thing because, regardless whether you're in safety, ergonomics, any type of honestly scientific discipline where you're gathering information that is at a technical level, explaining that to someone who is not coming from that viewpoint is difficult. And it makes that jargon and that use of information, you can't have the proper conversations when you're trying to explain what you're doing and why it's important. And then that person's trying to understand it and say, should I spend money based on what you're explaining to me?
Yeah.
And so the more easily you can translate the risk assessment approach and help people visualize it and reduce some of the jargon and some of the approaches there to kind of make it very straightforward. What does this mean to me? How do I quickly understand what you're trying to show me?
Yeah,
That's kind of a key evolution as well.
agreed. And I've just a little exposure about me. I'm a bit of a neuroscience geek. It just from my training background and everything. And a lot has been exposed in recent years. And so I like to look at a lot of things like cognitive load and cognitive bandwidth and cognitive, just how much you invest. And we used to invest so much on the front end, as you said, literally used to drag around a Pelican case full of equipment. And then you do all this front cognitive loading just to get a score, a relative risk score from one of these tools we would use, these assessment tools. Frankly, and where I'm going with this is that would be one exposure on a Gantt chart full of projects you've got to get done. And the point I think I'm driving at is that there was all this upfront load. So you did all that before you even started to think about what kind of solutions you'd come up. And I had found it became very easy to just want to get that one off of your desk, check that box, move on now down the Gantt chart. Did you find anything similar to that in your experience?
Yeah. I mean, when you think about the loading, I mean, I think what I always consider is the workload you're placing on people at our facilities to understand risks and gather information, because ergonomics is one of the hazards in the facility. And
Right.
when you start saying that in order to understand that hazard, you have to put this much workload and you have to understand this much information to do it well, it starts to become overloading. And then are you getting the value for how much you're really asking of those people? And
Yes.
so finding ways to simplify how we're doing what we're doing, not dumb it down,
Thank you.
but optimize, simplify, using technology to take some of the workload off, make it more functional, get faster to what is more important to everybody is honestly, if you have good data to help make decisions, but then get to those meetings where you're making decisions on how to reduce risk and change jobs. And that's where you're engaging with people at the plant more effectively, because they don't want to spend all that time talking about your risk assessments. That's kind of like the appendix to the old reports we used to write. Put all your data, all the nerd stuff in the appendix,
Right.
and then give them the executive summary that explains exactly what we need to do. And then let's get down to the actual changes. And that's what we got to get to.
I love it. And again, our conversations in the past at different conferences and also I follow you on social media, and I got that sense of you that you have a certain egalitarian to you, and you recognize that you use the phrase, I got to jump on this. And it was a great one. This isn't about dumbing down. This gets to that cognitive bandwidth. A lot of these people we rely on, they've already got a full plate. And they're specialists at what they do. And so we have to be careful treading not to just dump more things on their desk, more things on their lap. And I love how like you say, get it up into the executive summary so we can look at it fast and act on it and not just be getting lost in the weeds. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, even going back to when I was a consultant, it was almost like you're not a good enough consultant unless your report is really long and very detailed. Right.
Right.
But then you find, because you're like, I have to show you how much I know. So therefore, this has to be a lot of words, a lot of pictures, a lot of graphs, a lot of information. And what you end up finding on a regular basis is how often those reports end up in a drawer.
Right.
And do not become actionable because there's too much information, too much at a time, and not really digestible information. And, a lot of times right now is like we tell, people talk about, do you write a report? I'm like, no, I don't want a report. I want you to be able to see the information quickly, understand it. If I need to understand the data, I need to know where I can get it, but let's not do it the old way anymore.
Yeah. So glad to hear you say that. Coming from a clinician background, we learn the same lessons early in our career. I used to, as a doctor of physical therapy, I used to write these long, exhaustive evaluations and realize my referral sources, the MDs, they don't have time to read this. What am I doing?
No.
Yeah, you've got to get to the point. Well, one of the things that's unique about your perspective, or one of the many things, is about scaling safety. You lead ergonomics initiatives across a massive organization, Cargill itself. So how do you ensure both a consistency while also addressing unique challenges to individual sites? As we both know, individual sites have their own cultures and their own approaches to things. How do you balance that?
Well, the balance is you have to provide structure where it needs structure. So when you're saying we need to collect this data and it needs to be accurate and consistent across our organization, then you provide the systems, the technology, the resources to do that the same way each time, and making sure the plants have access to that. They have the training, they have everything they need, and you make it as easily accessible as possible to run that piece. But also understanding that this is, when you're at a corporate, you're not trying to control everything. You're trying to say, we need to do these things, but then this is your plant. This is your challenges. You have the flexibility and the creativity to go run your program.
Yeah.
But what I'm trying to do from a professional ergonomist level is to give you the structure to say, this is what is a good ergonomics program. This is good ergonomics data. Do this and then use it, and then use that to drive the changes in your plant. And that's your job to drive the changes. And of course, we're there as technical support when they need it, and to help them with find the right vendors, find the right solutions, continue the process. But you can't, you got to figure out what content do you need to control and what content do you need to allow flexibility, because Cargill is not only are we large, but we're a very different type of company because we're made up of all kinds of different businesses, which means we don't have the same type of work going on in each plant. We don't have the same resources in each plant. We do a lot of different things. I mean, one plant's producing chocolate, one's mining salt underneath the lake, one is, processing corn, and one is, we have obviously a lot that is processing meat. That's a lot of different types of work and people and resources and hazards. So you have to be flexible to say that one way is not going to help every one of those sites. But a structure can help. And then they have to figure out how to take that structure and make it work for their business and for those sites.
Wow. As you're describing that, I'm thinking of those three levels of, operational, strategic, and tactical. And I think years ago, I think I read there's it's free online. There was a United States Marine Corps warfighting book you can find, and it describes those three things. And that's kind of what I hear you saying, is that you have to have this strategic vision, but you're going to have different places that are going to operationalize it differently, and they're going to use different tactics. Is that what we're describing?
Absolutely. And you have to be fully open to what those changes are, and you can't walk in with a regimented or strict approach to say it must be this way. There are certain things we say you must do this.
Sure.
Because otherwise you're not doing proper ergonomics risk analysis and solution development. You have to do some things the right way, but as for saying how much you do, where you have to focus on, what type, like the level of hazard in all those different environments is dramatically different. So how much effort we have to put in each one is different. How much time we have to put in, how much you expect of each of those plants is all different. And you just have to be flexible for that and make sure your process can handle it.
It's that flexibility, I think, that I've admired, again, from you from afar, again, from like following you on LinkedIn and whenever you're speaking at conferences, is that some of us can get stuck in our rut, but others of us realize we've got to keep growing. And one of the things that, we were very fortunate at TuMeke to have you do the webinar. And this gets to what we call tech forward thinking. How do emerging technologies like, for instance, TuMeke, AI enhanced computer vision, fit into the future ergonomics at a place like Cargill, where you have that diversity and you have to strategize and technicians and you have operations? How do you apply, roll that sort of thing? How do you fit that?
Well, I mean, when you walk into with any technology, what you're trying to understand is what does it do and how does it fit within this structure that you've created, and therefore, is it going to help me do something? Is it going to help support the implementation of that program and make it easier for the people in the field? That's the ultimate key. Is that, does it make it easier for people? Does it make it accessible to more locations? Can we provide remote support so the expertise is more easily provided to those people without having to travel all the time? I mean, those are all things we have to consider, because there's only so many ergonomists in the field and there's only a few of us in Cargill, type of thing. So we have to, plan for that. So with technology, it's about saying, where does it fit? What does this do for me or for these plants, type of thing? And something like computer vision for us, what was clear is that we have, just within North America, right now we have just over 80 plants that we are working within the enterprise that I'm working in.
Wow.
And those plants are spread across the US and Canada. And 38 of those are in our protein division. The rest of them are in our non-protein division. And how do you support 80? And there's absolutely zero way we can travel to all those. Right. If I asked each one of those plants just to do one assessment a month, and if they didn't know how to do it, to say, can you travel and help them? No, you can't. It's absolutely impossible, logistically not possible, and inexpensive. When you figure out that this ability to work with certain tech, that the data can be collected on site, that the amount of knowledge is less than someone having to be completely knowledgeable about ergonomics, that you have to understand a few key things to gather good data. And then you can slowly help them understand how to use the data, or just help them remotely with the right expertise, type of thing, to kind of say, now the ability to interact with more locations is a lot easier, so that we essentially become the internal consultants for the business and what does everybody want to do with consultant? They don't want to pay for travel.
Right.
Who's closer? I don't want to pay your travel time. I don't want to pay your travel. Those are all travel expenses are one of the key things that everybody wants to reduce, because it feels like it's a lot of there's a lot of wasted time and money in having to do that on a regular basis. So you have to be very strategic on when you travel, why you're traveling, and then how do you manage all that without going out there? And this is where technology is helping us do that.
One of your pearls from our webinar that rang like a bell, and it's to this point you just made, was, I don't need to fly across the country to watch someone lift a box. I think that was a Daveism. I'm going to hold that to you. And it was a great one. Because it rang so true. It's like, I think you were discussing the NIOSH lifting equation, and it's sort of like, material handling. I've seen a guy lift a box, lift a box, lift a box. It's sort of like, we can capture this. And then, like you said, you can do it remotely, and you can move that information to the proper source remotely. I really agree with you. You mentioned also the wrinkles that happen with travel as well. The expense is one thing. First of all, it may be a fleeting thing that may not time up with your travel. Right. And then lastly, travel ain't what it used to be as far as being smooth. A lot of times you get to an airport and you've been bumped.
Well, I mean, I think when you're talking about the timepiece, the other thing that's really critical there too is that if a facility says, I have one job to look at, if they go collect a video, that means I could look at that video tomorrow.
Right.
If you're saying I have to come out there, then I'm going to tell you I'll be there in 6 weeks.
Yep.
Right. So now the time to move forward at the plant level is changed. Yeah. And that is even a bigger impact, because now you're talking about how much quickly Can we understand the risk, explain the risk, and start moving towards solution development instead of taking 8 weeks just to get to the point where you evaluated the hazard?
Yeah.
And it's the time factor there is huge.
And that lag time is exposure time too, as we both know. I mean, that's not being solved or even addressed in that however many weeks or months to finally get that sort of thing done. And that's where we get from like insight into action. Many companies gather ergonomic data, a lot of ergonomic data, and then they struggle to implement the change. It's kind of what I was describing earlier, where there's so much upfront work and so much cognitive load, and you haven't even got to the solutions portion yet. What's the key to turning insights into real measurable improvements in your mind, in your experience?
Before you implement any technology, you should know what you're doing with the data beforehand. So if you don't know what you're going to do with the information and you think you're just going to go gather a bunch and then figure it out, well, that's the wrong approach.
Right.
You should know what's coming out of the system and then know how are you going to start using that to help change what's going on in your facilities. Now, we've been pushing technology rather quickly at Cargill this because we're trying to change how we implement ergo here. We're trying to get better at it all the time, but we've made mistakes and we've gone probably a little too fast a couple of times. And then you end up having information and then you start to work on how to use that information. And all of a sudden you find out it takes a year before you figure out how to truly use everything you've gathered. And then you're like, was that really good use of time type of thing, especially at the plants to say, should they collect the data before we're ready to use it? And that's the key thing in all this is that you cannot waste the time at the plant level.
No,
absolutely not. So they have a limited resource time, limited ability to do certain work. And if you're going to ask them to do something, it should lead towards an action to actually reduce risk. Not 6 months from now, 12 months from now, but each thing moves down a path. And, one of the things we learned with using TuMeke is that, and it probably happens a lot with the shiny new object, is that the first thing everybody wanted to do was gather a lot of videos.
Yeah.
And get all the nice, cool images and everything evaluated and everything like that. But you can be 3-4 months in. I'm like, well, that's great. You have 30 assessments sitting there. And how many controls do we have? Even from that, it's about changing the mentality at our level to say, your goal isn't more assessments. Your goal is how many high hazard jobs have you evaluated and how many controls do we have in place? And getting into that mentality that I'd rather you have 6, 10 good controls implemented over the course of a 12-month period than 100 assessments.
Right.
Right. Now, sometimes you have to do a lot to understand which ones you have to focus on, but we are trying to have a process in place that does an initial hazard ID, helps us target well which ones we need to go to, and then evaluate. You deep dive with the technology and everything from there. And that for us is where we're trying to say, do a little bit of upfront work, prep yourself. It might take 1 or 2 months of prep, but then you're technically really launching your program. And now you're being effective at a slow, consistent pace, which is perfectly fine to kind of make sure you're getting good controls in place.
That's perfect. And that's so prophetic. I had a former colleague who since passed away, but he was an occupational therapist of some repute. And he always implied that to me or drove that home was, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What is the answer you're trying to get? Start from that. And that way you always know what you're aiming towards, to your point. And just gathering up info, it is overwhelming and it can leave people overwhelmed and not that analysis paralysis, all the stuff we learn about. And that kind of brings us to another thing, and that's collaboration and buy-in. You have to interact with frontline workers and managers all the way up to executives and make sure they understand that this isn't just a corporate soundbite or an initiative, but something that actually sticks. How do you convey that to these different levels? Do you have a formula or something you use?
I don't know if there's a great formula, to tell you the truth. I think the simple answer is there is being open, honest, and informative. And that when you're trying to get something done, you talk at all those levels to find out if you have the right idea. I think part of what makes it work is talking to people and getting the input, so that at a corporate level, you don't try and push things out there that are just your idea. Because I don't work in the plant anymore, right? So in that sense, that's not my day-to-day life. And I need to recognize that the people that are actually doing the work, the people that are actually reducing the hazards in Cargill, are the ones that are in the plant. So I can't make their jobs any harder. My goal is to make their jobs easier and making sure that they can put the right time in to be with, to interact with our employees and do everything that we need to do. So for me, it's, when I'm interacting at an executive level, it's trying to explain a process, trying to explain why we're going to implement a technology, implement something that will have a positive change in the workplace. Mm-hmm. And then working with plants to basically say, what works for you? What kind of timelines? What type of workload? Understanding to make sure that when we bring it down to them, it's functional. And a lot of times what we end up doing is we pilot test everything. So individual facilities, everything we do, whether it's a new checklist, a new piece of technology, every little thing, it's like, let's test, does this work? How much time is this taking out of your month type of thing? Yeah. Is it easy to do? What doesn't work? What does? So making sure the more we get feedback, the more we tighten it up. And therefore, when we implement, we already know, hey, 4 or 5 plants got it working and it's functioning properly. To be honest, the work we're doing with TuMeke, we've been focusing on 5 to 6 plants for over a year. So we have not, from an expansion perspective, we've expanded a little bit in our protein business, but in that, we're only trying to push an extra plant here or there when they're ready, because it took, honestly, about a year to figure out all of the little problems that might pop up and change things and figure out, okay, let's change this part of the process. Let's do this, whatever is necessary. But since we're asking them to do something new, giving them time, giving them the ability to figure it out, and giving them that, going back to that flexibility idea, because, sometimes we sit there, to get a technology and they think, well, we got to use it. And they're like, so what is our goals? They would ask, say, how much do you want us to do? I said, I don't have a goal. I said, it's your plan. You tell me what your goal is. And then they come back, because I want them to give me a sense of, give me your goal based on your capacity.
Yeah.
And then, what happened on a regular basis is everybody overestimated their capacity. They all went out and said, oh, I can do all this. I can do this. I'm like, in my back of my mind, I'm like, okay, go try that. Right. And 2 months later, it's like, this is horrible. I'm like, I never told you had to do that.
Yeah.
So what would you like to do? Half of that, quarter of that. Perfect. It's like, but I'd rather you do say, hey, we'll do this, but we'll get it done every month. Done. You figured out what works for your plan.
That's wise.
We'll do that.
That's really wise. Whether it's, as you might say, piloting not a whole plant, but maybe a department, maybe not a department, just a shift within that department. And then, using it as a case study to see, and build as you go, rather than spreading it as far and wide as possible and then discovering all of these wrinkles. Now you have all these wrinkles you're trying to sort out, as opposed to doing it methodically. You have a scientific approach to things, a sort of in vitro approach. Let's look at it under glass first, and then we'll roll it out into in vivo. And that gets me thinking about that vernacular we were talking about earlier, speaking to different people in different roles. And I love your term. It's not about dumbing down. It is cognitive load. They've got enough on their plate. We've got to make this palatable and, simple enough that they can do it and stay up. And, ROI in the business case always comes up. Companies are always, they deliberately, and they should, they have to look at numbers. And how do you quantify ROI in ergonomics programs when you find you have that soundbite moment and you've got to get the point across? Do you have any things that you use that are helpful?
Well, I think the one thing the reality is there's no one answer for everybody. Right. Because each company has measures of what they consider to be positive ROI. And even within that, there's a difference between what sometimes they look at as ROI for an operational project versus a safety or ergonomics related project. Because some companies, they may link them together and say everything has the same measure. We must achieve a payback within this period or it doesn't happen. If that's the case, then you have to work within that model. And most of the time, injury reduction is not going to be one of the numbers that an engineer is going to take because it's an unknown number. It's an unknown prediction. It's always going to be a quality or a production related or staffing related change that you're going to say there is an absolute number that we're going to save with this process. So if you're in a company that has to do that, then you have to make sure you gather that data. If you're in a company where where the mentality is if the risk is high enough, then we will invest to eliminate that risk for the business. Well, now your change is you have to be very clear and good with the data you're using to define that risk and making sure that when you're asking for money to solve a problem, that you're not asking for money for a low level problem and being very forceful. In other words, you have to argue, you have to pick your arguments, and that argument has to be based on data and proper analysis of the risk. And when you can say that, hey, I'm the person at the plant, when I tell you that this is high risk, that means I've done this, 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 and this, and I can show you that there is a clear problem and my solution will eliminate these things. Now you're talking in a way where you're at a competency level that the person that is the general manager or the operations person in that plant can understand that you're functioning at a good level and you're using data the same way, which you should be as an ergonomist, as an engineer, that you're making definitive data-based recommendations. If you're walking in and just saying, we're going to get rid of this bending, we're going to make this change because it'll make it better for the person. And what does that, you're making this argument for this job. Is that the right argument? Is that the one? Obviously every little change might be a positive, but the big question is, are you missing the issues or things that really need to be fixed in that plant that are going to be high value for a lot of people?
Makes total sense. And you've been very generous with your time. I want to ask one more question to land this plane. And that is looking ahead. If you had to predict what's in the next big shift coming in workplace ergonomics, have you gazed into your crystal ball and what do you might see on the horizon if Dave ruled the world? What would be some of the things you would predict happen?
Well, I think I think all of us believe that the next phase will be artificial intelligence, and especially from the perspective of utilization of data and optimization of processes. Continue to evolve, improving anytime that AI, not to remove things, but again, it goes back to that idea of what can be automated to find hazards quicker, understand data better, process more types of information and bringing it all together to provide a better understanding of what the true risk is in the workplace. So not just one video, one piece of information, postural or kinematic data, but everything about the people in the plant, the operational data, all the information that come together to start being able to be more. AI can take us to a much better predictive approach to risk versus right now. We're still functioning on a case by case and lower level predictability. And I think we have to get ahead of the risk a little bit better. And I think with what technology is helping us for gathering data and all the information that can come in and all the information that can be very cumulative, now we have to start understanding that better and being able to use it to truly integrate with our operational data and say, can we understand where the hazards may pop up in the future, when we make changes, how those things can occur. So I think AI is about, trying to help us process information better.
And predictive, as you said, it's the gold standard, the leading indicators. We're always looking upstream. And I agree with you. I think we're going to see syntheses happen from, we recognize now things are multivariate, combinatorial, integrated. And then from that, we recognize emergent properties. When we have AI on our side, we can get more predictive, and predictive is upstream, isn't it? I mean, that's what we strive for.
Yep.
Yeah.
I mean, when you start bringing in technology to gather all that data, that is the ultimate goal down the road, right? Is not just to find the one job to fix, but to say, how do we finally integrate ourselves into the process to say, can I help the business run and know where their risks are and the types of things we need to change to control those risks on the fly as we go, as things change throughout a day or week.
Right. Well, it's exciting times, isn't it? We're looking forward to where it comes. And that's why we love to get together with someone like you who has vision, who's been around the block like I have, and yet has an understanding that, this is just the beginning. Wait till see where we go. Folks, he's a certified professional ergonomist. He's the ergonomist lead for food solutions at Cargill. David Brody, thank you so much for your time and attention. We really appreciate the opportunity to pick your brain, so to speak, and to get an idea of a leader in the field like you. I hope perhaps we can have you back sometime soon.
Absolutely, Matt. Always a pleasure talking with you.
Likewise here. So with that, folks, this has been the TuMeke podcast. We'll see you next time. And thank you. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.